welcome to another episode of Colorado Politicking. I'm your host, Pat Poblete, and this week we are actually going to take a look forward to a potentially groundbreaking antitrust case that will be taking place in Denver next week. And you can't really talk about courts or cases that are taking place in courts without bringing in our crack court reporter, Michael Karlik. Michael, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm well, Pat. Thank you for having us.
So I want to dive into this case that you're going to be spending quite a bit of time on next week, centering on DaVita Inc. and its former founder, Kent Thiry. What can you tell us about just the dynamics of this case?
Well, first of all, Pat, this is a rare, high-profile white-collar trial that's not taking place in, say, Manhattan or California. It's occurring at the federal district court here in Denver. And as you mentioned, there are two names on the defense side of the table that Coloradans might have heard of: DaVita, the Fortune 500 company that's located in Denver, and Kent Thiry, the former leader of the company from about 1999 to 2019. The Justice Department is alleging that the two of them broke century-old antitrust law with a series of gentlemen's agreements with their competitors. Essentially, the agreement was that they would not hire DaVita employees proactively or solicit DaVita employees, despite the fact these are supposed to be competitors in the healthcare industry. Now, there's a second component to those agreements that said if DaVita employees were being considered for a job, they would have to alert their supervisors at DaVita before they could be considered for the position. Now, the Justice Department's contention is that this is inherently anti-competitive behavior, and the phrase they use is allocating the labor market. In essence, keeping DaVita employees at DaVita and preventing them from moving to other companies. Now, it'll be interesting to see whether the jury agrees with that, because one of the things they'll have to prove is intent. Did DaVita and Kent Thiry intend to allocate the labor market by keeping DaVita employees at DaVita? If so, that could be an antitrust violation with up to 10 years in prison on each count for Kent Thiry and up to a $100 million fine for DaVita, again, on each count.
Now, Michael, I want to follow up on something you said right there. You called this at the outset, you called it a groundbreaking case. And I want you to elaborate on that, because I'm sure you have, and I certainly have seen plenty of antitrust cases work their way through the court system here in this country in the course of my time as a reporter. What is it that makes this so unique?
Well, Pat, the defense says that they were simply not on notice that this violated antitrust law. This is kind of a novel application of laws against bid rigging or price fixing to these non-solicitation agreements. And so partly what the defense has pointed to is that typically antitrust cases are resolved according to the rule of reason. That means that you'll look at the anti-competitive effects of some behavior, but then also consider what might have happened to foster competition. And then only after time, as the behavior becomes clearer, can you say that some violations are inherently anti-competitive? Again, longstanding rules against bid rigging and price fixing. Here, the Department of Justice went straight to saying that it's inherently anti-competitive. And so I imagine that a lot of prosecutors around the country and also corporations will be looking at whether this strategy succeeds. And if there's a guilty verdict, they'll certainly be looking at the appeal and consequently, whether it might end up before the Supreme Court.
Well, thank you, Michael, for that. We will be on the lookout for your coverage. It will be excellent, I'm sure, as most of your coverage almost always is. And I want to pivot from there on to political correspondent Ernest Luning. And Ernest, it kind of strikes me right now that perhaps some of our viewers might not know Kent Thiry and thus might be a little curious as to why it is Colorado Politics is taking such an interest in this case. What can you tell us about the DaVita founder?
That's a good question. He was CEO of DaVita for close to 21 years, had a big impact, though, in the last 10 years on Colorado's political scene. Even if some of our viewers don't know Kent Thiry, they know some of the things he's accomplished. There's few Coloradans this century who have had as big an impact on the state's political landscape as Kent Thiry. I'll mention right off the bat that Kent's had politics in his blood for a long time. He was a student council president in the small high school in a small town in Wisconsin where he grew up. And he was also the first student to serve on the local school board there. Fast forward until about 10 years ago, he began getting involved in Colorado politics. He was the driving force between the Let Colorado Vote organization, which got behind Propositions 107 and 108, which voters passed by good margins. What those did is they let unaffiliated voters vote in Colorado primaries, and they established Colorado's presidential primary, which we used to have but stopped doing after 1996. Those have had huge impacts on Colorado's political makeup. Ken Thiry also was the main guy behind Fair Maps Colorado, which passed amendments Y and Z in 2018. Those are the amendments that established independent commissions to draw congressional and legislative lines in Colorado. That just happened this last summer and fall, and we'll see how that works out. But took those out of another commission in the legislature's hands, and that's of course had another big impact. He was also a main driving force behind 2020's repeal of the Gallagher Amendment. He put more than $1 million into that campaign. And that is one of those thorny fiscal issues that the state's been trying to fix for decades. And Ken Thiry got it done.
Well, thank you, Ernest, for that context, and thank you for the background, Michael. We will be on the lookout for your continued coverage of DaVita and Ken Thiry. That trial is set to start on Monday here in Denver, so keep an eye out all next week for continued updates from Michael on that case. For both Michael and for Ernest, I've been Pat. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again next week.